to that spirit of story time. You know, last time I told you the story of Bozo the Button Buster by Carl Sandburg. And today I have another story about buttons and a man. And this is, you see, when I was a little boy, about 4, my grandmother used to tell us a story to my 2 older brothers and I, who are both deceased, so I can't ask them about it, about a man who could tell what people did by looking at their buttons. Well, I don't remember the story other than that. I've looked for it. I can't find it in print anywhere. I've done Google searches. So I decided I'll just tell the story the best I can. So this isn't the story my grandma told me, but the idea is the one I got from her. I call my story Milton Peabody, the man who collected buttons. Most people walk past a lost button without even noticing it. They'll step over it, they'll kick it across the floor, they'll sweep it away in the dust at the end of the day. But Milton Peabody, he never did that. Milton believed that when something small falls away from a person, it usually means something larger has been happening in their life. And Milton took that to heart. Milton lived in 2 small rooms above the tailor shop on Maple Street. Most people in town did not even know much about him. They knew he wore wire-rimmed glasses and he walked slowly as if he were always thinking about something, and had the curious habit of picking up buttons. These could be buttons that he found on the sidewalk. It could be buttons that he found on church steps. Often he'd find them around the schoolyard or even grocery store floors. Whenever Milton Peabody found one, he'd pick it up, hold it toward the light at arm's length, turn it slowly between his fingers as if casting a spell, and then slip it carefully into his pocket. If you listen closely when Milton walked down Maple Street, you could sometimes hear a faint clicking of the sound of buttons in his coat pocket. That's how many buttons he collected over the years. You see, years earlier, Milton had worked downstairs in the tailor shop. It was quiet work. Thread and cloth, measuring tapes, draped around the neck, the soft hiss of a steam from an iron. One of the first things a tailor learns is that a button can tell you a surprising amount if you look at it closely. Hold it to the light, and you might see the faint colors of the cloth it came from. You might notice the thread that once held it in place. You might see where it had worn smooth from years of being in the same place. Milton had learned to notice such things, and after many years of doing it, he had grown very good at noticing these small things. Maybe a little Sherlock Holmes in the making. One afternoon, Milton found a brass button outside the hardware store. He picked it up, turned it toward the light, and smiled. That must be Mr. Talbot. He must be fixing his fence again, he said quietly. Later that afternoon, Mr. Talbot passed by grumbling about a loose fence post and wondering where the missing button from his coat had gone. Well, Milton returned it without a word. But Mr. Talbot was very happy. Another time, Milton found a tiny white button near the schoolyard fence, and he said, slowly turning it around toward the light, someone was in quite a hurry this morning, he murmured. Later that day, a little girl arrived home missing the top button from her sweater, breathless from having run nearly the whole way from school. Milton left the button on the teacher's desk the next morning. It went on this way for a long time. Then one cold evening, he found a heavy black coat button outside the diner. He studied it for a moment. Long night shift, Milton said softly. The next morning, the man who worked the late night shift at the mill came in asking the tailor if he could sew a button back on his coat. Well, sure enough, Milton had the button, and he knew exactly what to do. After a while, the town began to notice. Some said Milton Peabody could read a life from a button. Milton scoffed at that. Some said he had a strange sort of magic, but Milton didn't see it as magic. Milton himself would have said it was much simpler than that. Milton just believed that sometimes you understand things better when you step back and look at them from a little distance. Isn't that the truth? Up close, life can look tangled and confusing, but from a little further away, patterns begin to appear. Milton sometimes thought of it as a way a town looks from high in the air. From above, the streets seem neat and orderly. From down on the ground, they can feel crooked and messy, maybe even a little dirty. Perhaps life was the same way. When Milton knew where a button belonged, he returned it. Sometimes he handed it quietly to its owner. Sometimes he left it on a counter or desk where it would be found. Sometimes he sewed it back himself downstairs in the tailor shop. But he never quit picking up the buttons. You see, Milton believed that when something small falls away from a person, it is a kindness to help put it back. And he lived his life on that principle. But there were other buttons. Buttons whose stories he could only partly see, but whose owners he did not know. A brass button that smelled faintly like motor oil, probably from a traveler who stopped at the gas station out on Route 23 somewhere. A pale blue button from a child's coat that must have come through town on a passing bus. A worn coat button dusted with the gray powder of the highway. Those buttons Milton could not return, so he kept them. In his room above the tailor shop, he had a small tin where he placed the buttons whose stories he understood, but whose people he could not find. Sometimes he would take one out and hold it again toward the light. "Well," he'd say quietly, "whoever you were, I hope things turned out all right for you, but I've got your button if you ever need it." One afternoon, Milton found a button that puzzled him. It was worn smooth and carried almost no thread at all. He turned it slowly in the light. He turned it once, then twice, then again. The button told him nothing. No story. No clues. Milton was perplexed. He studied it more carefully, holding it further and further away, the way he always did. But nothing. Had he lost his ability? This had never happened before. Finally, Milton stood up, walking to the small mirror hanging by the door, and looked at himself. And there, on his own coat, was a missing button. Of course, he thought, the missing button belonged to him. For a long moment, Milton stood there, holding the little button out toward the light. Then he smiled. "Perhaps that's the trouble with a man's own story," Milton said quietly. "You can't quite hold it far enough away to see it clearly." Milton Peabody had spent years studying the buttons of the whole town. But his own life was too close up, too close to himself. He couldn't see it. And after that day, whenever Milton Peabody found a lost button and held it to the light, he did so a little more gently, because he understood something he had only guessed before. From a distance, a town looks neat and orderly. From up close, the streets twist and turn, and the pavement might be cracked and maybe even a little dirty. Perhaps a life, thought Milton, is the same way. And sometimes the best a man can do is hold the small pieces of it out toward the light and try to see what he can. You know, once you tweak this story a little bit with the names, little details of your own town or specific kids, It'll feel even more personal and alive because, this is our own story. We can see things from a distance. We can understand things. But when it's in our own life sometimes, it's a little harder to examine it. So sometimes when things get a little troubling, if we're lost in something, maybe the best thing to do is just step back. I love stories, as you can probably tell. And I think whether it's intellectual by Ernest Hemingway or Shakespeare or Flannery O'Connor or Edgar Allan Poe or a kid's story, I love children's stories. It's still a really, really great way to examine life. I'm Dale Powell. I hope you enjoyed the spirit of story time, and I'll see you the next time. Got a little Easter tale coming up for you soon.